لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. يسر إخوانكم بمكتبة الموحدين بجزر البحر الكاريبي وأمريكا بالتعاون مع مركز السنة بلندن أن يرحبوا بفضيلة الشيخ عواد العنزي حفظه الله تعالى ليلقي على السامعين محاضرة بعنوان أحكام العيد. Muwahhideen Publications in the Caribbean and US, in conjunction with Markaz al-Sunnah in London, is pleased to have with us the Honorable Shaykh Awaad al Anazy, may Allah preserve him, who will be talking about this evening the rulings of Eid. فليتفضل الشيخ مشكورا مأجورا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، حمدا يليق بجلال الله وعظيم سلطانه، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له تعظيما لشأنه، وأشهد أن نبينا محمدا عبد الله ورسوله الداعي إلى رضوانه، صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن سار على نهجه واقتفى أثره إلى يوم الدين، وسلم تسليما كثيرا مزيدا مباركا فيه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى. أيها الإخوة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته، وأسأل الله جل وعلا بأسماء الحسنى وصفاته العلى ليوفقنا وإياكم لكل خير، وأن يأخذ بأيدينا لما يحب ويرضى، وأن يجعلنا هداة مهتدين غير ضالين ولا مضلين. أيها الإخوة، لا شك أن فراق شهر رمضان فراق مؤلم على أهل الإيمان، لأن خروجه يعني انقضاء وقت مبارك جعله الله تبارك وتعالى موطنا للمؤمنين ليبرهنوا على صدق إيمانهم ومحبتهم لله ولرسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. وإذا انتهى شهر رمضان انتهى معه كثير من خصائصه وما جعله الله جل وعلا مرتبطا به، ومن ذلك الجزاء الذي تكفل الله جل وعلا به للصائمين. ففي الصحيح أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال الله تعالى: كل عمل ابن آدم له إلا الصوم فإنه لي وأنا أجزي به. فالجزاء هنا من الله تبارك وتعالى على هذه العبادة. وبانقضاء شهر رمضان ينقضي قول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: من صام رمضان إيمانا واحتسابا غفر له ما تقدم من ذنبه. ويذهب معها أيضا قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم: من قام رمضان إيمانا واحتسابا غفر له ما تقدم من ذنبه. ويذهب معها أيضا ليلة القدر التي هي في العشر الأواخر وفي أوتارها آكد، كما أخبر بذلك النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. وفيها قال عليه الصلاة والسلام: من قام ليلة القدر إيمانا واحتسابا غفر له ما تقدم من ذنبه. فعندما يخرج هذا الشهر تخرج معه الفضائل، ويخرج معه ما كان خصيصة له، كما قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه تصفد فيه الشياطين، وتفتح فيه أبواب الجنة، وتغلق فيه أبواب النيران، ويعتق الله جل وعلا فيه الرقاب من النار. ولذلك حق للمؤمن أن يودع هذا الشهر وقد قرب رحيله، وانقضت أيامه، أن يودعه بألم يعتصره على هذه الفضائل والخيرات والأجور الوافرات والحسنات المتتابعات وفضل الله جل وعلا. ولهذا شرع الله جل وعلا أن يودعه المسلم بجملة من العبادات، أذكرها على سبيل الاختصار قبل ذكر أحكام العيد وما يتعلق به. أولها أن يودع الشهر بزكاة الفطر. وزكاة الفطر فريضة فرضها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، وما فرض رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فإنه كما فرضه الله جل وعلا، لأن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا ينطق عن الهوى، بل هو مبلغ عن الله تبارك وتعالى. فيجب على المسلم إذا سمع أمر الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم أن يبادر إليه، وأن يعتقد أنه من عند الله تبارك وتعالى. فهذه فريضة زكاة الفطر فريضة فرضها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم على المسلمين، الصغير والكبير والذكر والأنثى والحر والعبد، يجب عليهم ممن غابت عليه شمس ليلة العيد وأدرك وقت وجوبها أن يخرج زكاة الفطر عن نفسه. وفيها حكم عظيمة، منها أنها ختام للشهر واستوداع له بعمل صالح، وفيها دليل على أن المؤمن إنما حياته كلها لله تبارك وتعالى. ومن حكمها أنها شكر لله تبارك وتعالى على تمام نعمة العبادة، وأن هيأ الله جل وعلا لك من القوة والصحة والعافية والسلامة في البدن والحواس ما استكملت به شهر رمضان، فتشكر الله جل وعلا على هذه النعمة بإخراج زكاة الفطر. وهي طعمة لإخواننا من الفقراء الذين لا يجدون ما يطعمون في يوم العيد، فيطعم إخوانه، ويعرف الغني على الفقير والواجد على المعدم في ذلك اليوم، حتى يكون الناس في يوم فرحهم بفطرهم على حد. وهذه من أعظم صور التكافل التي جاء بها هذا الدين العظيم. وهي أيضا طهرة للصائم من اللغو والرفث، وسد لما يحصل من نقص وخلل في هذا الصيام، فبها يستكمل الإنسان ويطهر صيامه. ولها حكم كثيرة، لكن هذا أشهر ما ذكر من حكمها. وقد قدمنا بأنها فريضة، والواجب فيها أن تخرج لأهلها ممن يستحقها من الفقراء والمساكين الذين لا يجدون ما يكفيهم في يوم العيد. فمن وجدت فاضلة عن حاجته وعن قوته وجب عليه أن يخرجها كما نص على ذلك الفقهاء، وهي صاع بصاع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. وقد قدره العلماء في هذا الوقت الآن بالكيلو، لأن الكيلو هو الذي أكثر ما توزن به الأشياء الآن. قدروها ب3 كيلو، 3 كيلو احتياطا، وإن كان الكيلوين والنصف تجزئ عند جمع كبير من أهل العلم، لكن نظرا لاختلاف الموازين فإن العلماء يرون أنها تخرج 3 كيلوات عن الشخص الواحد. فإن كان عنده زوجة وولد يخرجها عنهم، فإنه يخرج هذه الزكاة عن نفسه وعمن يمون ممن هم تحت يده، وتخرج مما يقتاته الناس ويأكلونه، لأن حديث ابن عمر قال صاعا من طعام، صاعا من طعام. وفي الحديث صاعا من شعير وصاعا من تمر. وفي حديث أبي سعيد الخدري ذكر أنواعا أخرى من الأقط والشعير والزبيب وغير ذلك مما كان يأكله الناس في ذلك الوقت. فنقول هنا الواجب أن تخرج مما يأكله الناس ويقتاتونه، فينظر فيما يقتاتونه الناس في بلده فيخرج صاعا من ذلك بصاع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، ويحتاط لنفسه في أن يخرج الطيب والجيد، لأن الله طيب لا يقبل إلا طيبا، والله يقول لن تنالوا البر حتى تنفقوا مما تحبون. وأما الكلام الذي انتشر من جواز إخراجها نقودا، فالذي عليه المحققين من أهل العلم والذي تطمئن إليه النفوس أنه لا يجوز إخراجها نقدا، لأن النقد كان موجودا في زمن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، وأخرج الناس أمر الناس بإخراج زكاة أموالهم، ومع ذلك أمر وفرض رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أن تخرج طعاما. فيبقى الناس على ما فرض رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. أما الاعتذار بأن الناس قد استغنوا عن الطعام وهم بحاجة المال، فنقول هذا أمر تعبدي وأمر توقيفي، والله جل وعلا لا تخفى عليه حال العباد وهو ألطف بهم. بل ذهب العلامة الألباني رحمه الله لما سئل عن ذلك واستدرك على قول القائل أن الناس لا يحتاجونها، قال: الله أعلم سبحانه وتعالى بأحكامه وأرحم بخلقه، فالذي تطمئن إليه النفس أنه لا يجوز أن تخرج إلا من جنس ما حدده رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، وهذا له حكمة عظيمة. فينبغي للناس أن لا يتجرؤوا ولا يتجاسروا على الأخذ بأقوال ظاهرها خلاف هدي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وترخيص في غير محله، وإن كان قال بهذا القول أئمة أعلام، لكن عارضهم في ذلك أئمة أعلام هم أعلم وأكثر حجة ومعهم في هذا الخلاف الدليل. فينبغي لطلبة العلم أن يتأملوا في ذلك وأن يرشدوا الناس إلى سنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، وأن يعظموها، وأن يعلموا أن السلامة والنجاة بإذن الله جل وعلا في لزومها والحرص على اقتفاء السنة والتمسك بها، خاصة في مثل هذه الأزمنة ينبغي أن يكون سمة ظاهرة لطلبة العلم. الأمر الذي يلي ذلك بيان وقتها، فإن لها وقت وجوب وهو غروب شمس ليلة العيد، ولها وقت فضيلة كما ذكر العلماء، وهو أن يدفعها قبل أن يخرج إلى صلاة العيد إن كان يجد من يأخذها في ذلك الوقت، وهذا هو وقتها من غروب شمس ليلة العيد إلى صلاة العيد. وأما الجواز فيجوز أن تخرج قبل ذلك بيوم أو يومين لفعل أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، وأنهم كانوا يقبلونها في ذلك الوقت. الأمر الآخر من العبادة التي شرعت في ختام شهر رمضان عبادة التكبير. قال الله جل وعلا: لتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون، وذلك بعد ذكر أحكام الصيام. وقد جاء في السنة عن أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أنهم كانوا يكبرون بغروب شمس ليلة العيد، يجهر بها الرجال وتسر بها النساء في مساجدهم وبيوتهم، وعند ذهابهم إلى صلاة العيد يكبرون الله تبارك وتعالى. ثم بعد ذلك من العبادات التي شرعت صلاة العيد، وهي عبادة عظيمة وجليلة، وجاء التأكيد عليها في سنة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كما قالت أم عطية، وأمر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أن يخرج لها النساء والحيض ويعتزلن المصلى ليشهدن الخير ودعوة المسلمين. ولذلك ذهب بعض العلماء إلى وجوب صلاة العيد وأنها فرض عين، والجمهور على أنها فرض كفاية، الجمهور على أنها فرض كفاية. فيحرص المسلم على صلاة العيد ويعتني بها كما اعتنى بها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، ويعلم أن هذه عبادة مشروعة الحكمة منها ظاهرة، وهي إعلان شكر الله تبارك وتعالى على انقضاء شهر رمضان واجتماع المسلمين في هذا المقام العظيم الذي هو مقام كبير، واجتماع أهل الإسلام ويظهرون طاعتهم لله تبارك وتعالى. هذا كله دليل على أهميتها وعلى ما ينبغي للمسلم أن يحرص عليه. وقد كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يخرج في الفطر والأضحى إلى المصلى ليظهر هذه الشعيرة ويبرزها، والحديث في الصحيحين، وهذا لا يعارض صلاتها في المسجد الجامع إن كانت هنالك حاجة من مطر أو ريح أو غير ذلك من الأمور التي يحتاج إليها المسلمون، ولكن السنة أن تصلى. وصلاة العيد كصلاة الضحى تصلى بعد ارتفاع الشمس قيد رمح، وهكذا صلاها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. والسنة في الفطر أن يؤخر وقت الصلاة ويعجل الأضحى. هذا هو هدي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لحاجة الناس في الأضحى إلى ذبح أضحاهم وفي الوقت متسع. وهذه الصلاة صفتها ركعتان كما قدمنا كصلاة الضحى، ويصلي الركعة قبل الخطبة لفعل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، يكبر في الأولى تكبيرة الإحرام، ثم بعد ذلك بعد الافتتاح والتعوذ يكبر 6 تكبيرات، وفي الثانية يكبر 5 غير تكبيرة القيام بها. وردت الأحاديث عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، وإن قرأ فيها بسبح اسم ربك الأعلى وهل أتاك حديث الغاشية أو بقاف والقرآن المجيد واقتربت الساعة وانشق القمر، هذا كله وارد عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. وهنالك مجموعة من السنن التي ينبغي للناس أن يؤكدوا عليها، وهي أن يتناول قبل أن يخرج إلى صلاة العيد أن يتناول تمرات يقطعهن وترا تأكيدا لفطره في هذا اليوم وخروجه مفطرا لصلاة العيد. ويسن أيضا إشغال نفسه بالتكبير، وإن تيسر له أن يخرج لها ماشيا فهذا أفضل. والسنة أيضا أن يتجمل، وقبل ذلك أن يغتسل ويلبس أحسن الثياب، وأن يتطيب اقتداء برسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، مع إشغال نفسه بكثرة التكبير والتهليل والتحميد والتسبيح. ولا بأس كما قال العلماء رحمهم الله بالتهنئة للناس بعضهم لبعض في ذلك اليوم. هو منقول عن الإمام أحمد ونقله عن بعض الصحابة أنهم كانوا يقولون تقبل الله منا ومنكم صالح الأعمال، فهذا كان يفعله أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. هذا كله من الأمور التي ينبغي للمسلم أن يحرص عليها وأن يشغل نفسه بهذه الطاعة، لأن يوم العيد يوم طاعة، ليس فقط يوما للهو والعبث. يظن بعض المسلمين أن يوم العيد هو يوم للغفلة والتفريط، هذا لا يصح، بل يوم العيد يوم فرح بفضل الله وبإحسان الله إلينا أن انتهينا من عبادة عظيمة ويسر الله جل وعلا طاعات في شهر رمضان. فنحرص على أن يكون العيد أيضا يوما للشكر وطلب المغفرة والرحمة والمزيد والفضل من الله تبارك وتعالى، ونفرح فيه بفضل الله وإحسانه علينا ونعمته سبحانه وتعالى بأن يسر لنا من الخير وسلم رمضان إلينا وتسلمه منا، ونسأله أن يكون ذلك متقبلا. فهذا هو يوم العيد، ليس يوما للمفاخرة والخيلاء والكبر والإعراض عن طاعة الله تبارك وتعالى وذلك من الأمور التي ربما يفعلها بعض الناس، هذا كله من الخطأ. ولذلك النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أظهر الفضل لله تبارك وتعالى والشكر بهذه العبادات زكاة الفطر، التكبير، صلاة العيد، الحرص عليها، حث المسلمين على العناية بها. فقد كان له صلى الله عليه وسلم حلة يلبسها في العيد والجمعة، وكان صلى الله عليه وسلم يعتني بذلك ويأمر الصحابة بها، وكان صلى الله عليه وسلم يظهر عنايته بهذه العبادات. وكان صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا أفطر قطعهن وترا تأكيدا على التزام السنة والعمل بها حتى في يوم العيد. وهذا ورد في جملة من الأحاديث عنه صلى الله عليه وسلم في عنايته بهذه العبادات وختام شهر رمضان بما يظهر شكر الله تبارك وتعالى ويظهر عناية النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في هذه العبادة، وأيضا في غيرها من العبادات التي كان صلى الله عليه وسلم يختم بها شهر رمضان ويستفتح بها شوال بهذا العمل الصالح وهو صلاة العيد. الشاهد أيها الإخوة أن عمر المؤمن كله لله تبارك وتعالى. قل إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين لا شريك له وبذلك أمرت وأنا أول المسلمين. فينبغي لنا أن نحرص على أن نعمر أوقاتنا بطاعة الله، وأن نستعمل هذه الأوقات فيما يقربنا إلى الله تبارك وتعالى، وأن نعمل جاهدين لانقضاء أعمالنا وأوقاتنا في طاعة الله تبارك وتعالى. وأن نعلم أيضا أن لا تعارض بين أن يفرح المسلم بفضل الله وإحسانه وبين أن يعمل بطاعة الله تبارك وتعالى، فلا تعارض بين ذلك. فالفرح المشروع لا يعارض طاعة الله تبارك وتعالى، بل هو طاعة لله تبارك وتعالى إذا أحسن الإنسان فيه النية. فأوصي نفسي وإخواني بالاجتهاد في العمل الصالح والاجتهاد في طاعة الله تبارك وتعالى والاستكثار من الخيرات، وأن يكون فرحنا منضبطا بما جاء في سنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، وأن نجعل من هذه الأوقات فرصة للذكر والطاعة والعبادة والسلام على إخواننا ومصافحتهم حتى تحط الذنوب والخطايا، والتبسم في وجوههم وصفاء القلوب تجاههم ومسامحة إخواننا المسلمين وغير ذلك من أنواع العبادات التي ينتظمها هذا الفرح. أسأل الله بأسمائه الحسنى وصفاته العلى أن يجعلنا وإياكم من عباد الله الموفقين، وأن يرزقنا سنة نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وأن نتمسك بها قولا وعملا، وأن نلتزمها حتى نلقى الله تبارك وتعالى غير مبدلين ولا متحولين. الله تعالى أسأل أن يرزقنا وإياكم العلم النافع والعمل الصالح، وأن يختم لنا هذا الشهر بالخير والقبول والغفران والعتق من النيران، وأن يجعلنا ممن أدرك ليلة القدر وفاز بعظيم الأجر، وأن يجعلنا ممن صام وقام واجتهد إيمانا واحتسابا، إنه جواد كريم. كما أسأله سبحانه وتعالى أن يجعل هذا العيد عيد خير وبركة على أمة الإسلام في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها، وأن يهيئ المسلمين من أمرهم رشدا، أمرا يعز فيه أهل طاعته ويعافى فيه أهل معصيته، وتظهر فيه سنة نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم، ويعود فيه المسلمين إلى دينهم عودا حميدا، إنه جواد كريم. الله أعلم، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. أحسن الله إليكم شيخنا.
بارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم.
السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. Shaykh Awaad Ta'ala began with saying Bismillah alhamdulillah, praising Allah with a praise that is befitting to His majesty and His sovereignty, and invoking the peace and blessings upon our beloved Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the one who invited others to the pleasure of Allah and invited others to seeking and restraining oneself to His Sunnah, up until, and everyone who does that up until the day of resurrection. And then said, my dear brothers, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by His most beautiful names and lofty attributes to make us from amongst those who hold on to the Sunnah of our Master Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and that He will make us neither from those who go astray nor those who lead others astray, but that we will be rightly guided. Then said that at the conclusion of this blessed month of Ramadan, the believers are saddened by the departure of this month, because indeed with the departure of this month there are many virtues which are departing, and that the people of Iman take advantage of during this blessed time. This time which Allah Azza wa Jal has made a season of good for the believers, and given them various opportunities to come closer to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala by abiding by His legislation and the Sunnah of His Master sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when this month concludes, these various means of getting closer to Allah Azza wa Jal, and these various ways of earning the rewards of Allah Azza wa Jal, come to an end for the fasting person, and thus the believers are saddened by the conclusion of this month. As Allah Azza wa Jal said in the Hadith Qudsi, all of the deeds of the sons of Adam are for him, and the good deed is worth 10 good deeds, up to 700, up to many more, except for fasting. Allah Azza wa Jal said, except for fasting, for it is mine and I reward for it. So the reward for fasting is indeed great. The believers hope for and expect a reward for fasting during this blessed month. And at the end of this month, the believers are saddened because all of the great opportunities for blessings vanish, such as the blessing for fasting, about which the Messenger ﷺ said, whoever fasts Ramadan out of Iman and Ihtisab will have all of his previous sins forgiven. Fasting out of Iman and Ihtisab is fasting out of Iman or faith in the obligation and the virtue of fasting the month, and Ihtisab, fasting, seeking the reward for that noble act of worship. With the conclusion of this month, the believers are saddened by the removal of the reward for standing at night in prayer during this month, about which the Messenger ﷺ said, whoever stands in prayer in Ramadan out of Iman and Ihtisab will have his previous sins forgiven. And with the conclusion of this month, we no longer have the opportunity to seek out Laylatul Qadr, and so we are saddened by the fact that we no longer have the opportunity to seek out the night which is better than 1,000 months, which is in the last 10 nights of this blessed month, and most likely to be during the odd nights there, about which the Messenger ﷺ said, whoever stands in prayer on Laylatul Qadr out of Iman and Ihtisab will have his previous sins forgiven. As this month draws near to an end, the believers are saddened by the opportunity they had to come closer to Allah Azza wa Jal by no longer being tempted by the shayateen as much as they were outside of this month, because Allah Azza wa Jal shackles those shayateen during this month. And the believers are also saddened by the fact that there's no longer that caller calling out each night of Ramadan that Allah has people that He emancipates from the hellfire during these nights of Ramadan. And so the great blessings of this month come to an end at the conclusion of this month. And so the believers are saddened by this month coming to an end. At the end of this month, Allah Azza wa Jal has legislated for the believers a number of acts of worship to give thanks to Him at the conclusion of this month. To name a few, the first of these acts of worship are giving zakat al-fitr. Giving zakat al-fitr. And this is an obligation which the Messenger ﷺ placed upon the believers. And indeed, whatever the Messenger ﷺ says is an obligation is equal in being compulsory as if Allah Azza wa Jalla Himself had made an obligation in His book. Because the Prophet ﷺ does not speak of his own accord or his own desires. Rather, he simply conveys the message from his Lord. And when the believer hears any commandment of the Messenger ﷺ, he accepts it and implements it just like the commandments that he implements from Allah Azza wa Jalla. And so, Zakat al-Fitr is an obligation upon every Muslim, the young, the old, the male, the female, the free, and the slaves. And this obligation begins, it is an obligation upon everyone who lives to see the sunset of the last night of Ramadan. So whoever is alive at this time, it becomes obligatory upon him. It's his responsibility to give the Zakat al-Fitr, or for the person who was in charge of his affairs and who was financially responsible for him to give on his behalf. There are many aspects of wisdom behind this great act of worship, Zakat al-Fitr. Just to name a few, that when this month comes to an end, the believer keeps in mind that his entire life, every aspect of his life, is for Allah Azza wa Jal. And never does he do anything except that he strives to give thanks to Allah Azza wa Jal. And so when a believer lives to see the end of this month, he strives to give thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to give thanks to his Lord for allowing him to live this month in its entirety, and to give thanks for his Lord, to give thanks to his Lord for having given him the opportunities that were prepared for him during this month, coming closer to him. He gives thanks to his Lord for having the health and the strength during this month that enabled him to fast. The believer gives thanks to his Lord for all of these blessings. And this is part of the wisdom behind giving Zakat al-Fitr. That a person gives thanks to Allah Azza wa Jal for the blessing of having lived throughout this month. Another wisdom behind the legislation of giving Zakat al-Fitr is that our brothers who are poor and don't find any food on the day of Eid, who would otherwise be miserable on that day, when they find food and are no longer afflicted by hunger, they would rejoice along with all of the other believers who Allah Azza wa Jal has blessed with wealth and food. And so this is another wisdom behind Zakat al-Fitr, that it enables all of the believers to rejoice in the day of Eid. Not only the rich, but the rich and the poor would all rejoice together equally. And this is one of the greatest aspects that shows the brotherhood of Islam, and how Islam is something that brings about cohesion and unity in the society between all of the different people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, races, classes, so on and so forth. Another aspect of the wisdom behind Zakat al-Fitr is that it serves as an expiation for the shortcomings that the fasting person fell into during his fast. So any vain speech that the fasting person engaged in, any foul speech, any sins that he may have committed while fasting, that the Zakat al-Fitr would serve to make up for, to compensate for those shortcomings that he fell into during his fast. There are a number of other angles of wisdom behind the legislation of Zakat al-Fitr, but these are the main ones that have been mentioned by the people of ilm, the people of knowledge. Zakat al-Fitr is to be given to those who are deserving and needy, and they are the people who do not find on the day of Eid food enough to feed themselves and their families. And so whoever does not find a sla' of food on the day of Eid is to be given from Zakat al-Fitr. And the sla', as in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was a measurement. It was a measurement, just like in our day and time we have kilograms and pounds and the likes. And in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, this was a measurement. The ulama of our day and time have said that a sla' is equal to about 3 kilograms. To be on the safe side, we give 3 kilograms of a dry, storable food as Zakat al-Fitr. Many of the scholars have said that 2.5 kilograms is sufficient, but to be on the safe side, we should give 3. And so a person gives this amount, 1 sa', or 3 kilos of a dried, storable food, on behalf of himself and everyone who is under his care, everyone who is financially responsible for. So if a man has a wife and a child, he gives on behalf of himself, his wife, and his child, and so on and so forth. 1 sa' for each person, so 3 kilos for each person. The food that is to be given as zakat al-fitr is the food that is taken as a main staple food in the country where the Muslim resides. And as mentioned in the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it should be a sa' of barley or a sa' of dates. And there was a hadith mentioned, recorded by or narrated by Awaad al Anazy that gave several different examples of the types of food that were the staple foods at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. From amongst them was barley and raisins and other dried storable foods. So these are the types of foods that are given to the poor on the day of Eid, the main staple foods in the country where the Muslim is residing. So each Muslim must look at the country where he is residing and what is known amongst the people, what they use as their main staple food. And to be on the safe side for himself, the Muslim should look for the best quality of food that he can find. And in doing so, the believer is striving to implement what Allah Azza wa Jalla says in his statement, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You will never attain piety until you spend of that which you love. And so a person, by looking for a higher quality of food and paying more money for it in order to give to the poor, will be spending of that which he loves, of his wealth, and striving to attain that piety, that birr that Allah mentions. There is some widespread speech in our day and time, many people saying that it is permissible to give cash instead of food as zakat al-fitr. And the most qualified people of knowledge and the scholars have said that this is not permissible, because at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they also had currency. They had a type of cash. And the Prophet ﷺ did not instruct the believers at that time to give cash to the poor on the day of Eid as zakat al-fitr. Rather, he instructed them to give food as zakat al-fitr. Zakat al-mal, on the other hand, he did ﷺ command the believers to give in the form of cash. And so he made a distinction, and we should make a distinction, giving our zakat al-mal as cash and giving our zakat al-fitr as food. Some people may argue that in our day and time, the needs of people have changed, the situation is different, and people are no longer in need of food. They need cash more than they need food. And the great scholar of hadith of our day and time, Imam al-Albani, when addressing this argument, said that Allah knows better His rulings, and He is more merciful toward His creation. And so when Allah Azza wa Jalla, upon the tongue of His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, legislated giving zakat al-fitr in the form of food, not in the form of cash, was wise in this legislation and was merciful towards His creation in this legislation. This legislation is specific. It has guidelines. And so, what the souls of the believers are comfortable with and feel no discomfort in is that what we should give to the poor on the day of Eid is food, not cash. As for taking the views of people, the views such as this, which differ with the guidance of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, this is a dangerous course to walk on. Even if there are some of the people of knowledge who have held these views, there are other people of knowledge who are more well-grounded in their knowledge, who have said otherwise, and said that sticking to the Sunnah is more befitting, and that giving food instead of cash is what is legislated for the believers as Zakat al-Fitr. And so, following in their footsteps, the students of knowledge should instruct the people to do likewise, to hold on to the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, especially in our day and time, where we have drawn farther away from the time of prophethood, and the doubts and misconceptions and misguidance is more prevalent. We should be more active in promoting the Sunnah and advising the people to stick close and hold tight to the Sunnah. When it comes to the time of giving Zakat al-Fitr, when it must be given, there is a time that marks the obligation of when, it's the starting point of when each person becomes responsible for giving it. There is a time which it is better to give in, and there is a time which it is permissible to give in. As for the time when it becomes obligatory upon the believer to give Zakat al-Fitr in, then that is at the time of sunset on the last day of Eid. So whenever a Muslim lives to see that time, he becomes responsible for giving. If a person died before then, he would not be responsible for it, and his heirs would not be responsible for it, taking out of his inheritance to give on his behalf. And so the time that marks the obligation of giving Zakat al-Fitr is when the believer lives to see sunset of the last day, the last night of Eid. As for the virtuous time, the best time to give it, then that is after Salat al-Fajr on the morning of Eid and before the Salat al-Eid. And Zakat al-Fitr must be given before Salat al-Eid. It may not be given after. The best time to give it is after Fajr prayer on the morning of Eid and before Salat al-Eid on that morning. So that's the best time to give it. There is also a permissible time to give it, which is not the best, but it's permissible therein. And the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in were known to have given and received zakat during this time, which is 1 or 2 days before Eid. And so the best time to give Zakat al-Fitr is right after Fajr on the morning of Eid, but it's permissible 1 or 2 days before Eid to give Zakat al-Fitr. So this is one of these acts of worship which Allah Azza wa Jal has legislated for us on the day of Eid, giving Zakat al-Fitr. There are a few others. Another of the acts of worship that we are to do at the conclusion of this blessed month, the month of Ramadan, is making the takbir. Making the takbir. As Allah says, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ وَلِتُكْمِلُوا الْعِدَّةَ وَلِتُكَبِّرُوا اللَّهَ عَلَى مَا هَدَاكُمْ وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. Allah wants for you what is easy and does not want for you hardship. And He wants for you to complete the prescribed period, meaning the period of fasting. This is one of the ayat mentioning the ahkam of fasting in Surah Al-Baqarah. He wants you to complete the prescribed period and to make takbir of Him, to declare how great and how great He is, to celebrate His praises, to glorify Him, عَلَى مَا هَدَاكُمْ, because of Him guiding you, وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, and so that perhaps you would be grateful towards Him. And so, one of the other acts of worship that we are to do at the conclusion of this blessed month of Ramadan is making the takbir, saying Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, walillahi alhamd. We are to say this out loud, and the men are to say this out loud, to be heard by everyone, everywhere that we go, the masjid, on the way back and forth from our homes, and wherever we go, on the way to the Eid Musalla, the morning of Eid, wherever we may be, we say this takbir. And we say this starting with the sunset of the last night of Eid and ending at the Eid Salah. So from the night before Eid up until the morning of Eid when the Eid prayer starts, all that night and all that morning, we should say this whenever and wherever possible. Another of the acts of worship that Allah Azza wa Jalla has legislated for us at the conclusion of this month is Salat al-Eid itself. And indeed, attending this prayer, this very special prayer, is one of the great acts of worship, one of the noble acts of worship in Islam. There's an encouragement for and attending this prayer in the Sunnah, to the point that the Prophet ﷺ commanded the women to go attend this prayer, the women who normally are permitted to pray in their homes. And in fact, the Messenger ﷺ said that it's better for them to pray in their homes. But he commanded them to come out and attend this Salat al-Eid. Even the women who are menstruating and are not even allowed to pray, they are to attend this prayer, but not to be right in the Musalla, to distance themselves a bit from the Musalla, in order that they can witness all of the good and the dua being made by the Muslims on that blessed morning for the Salat al-Eid. Some of the scholars of Islam have said that because of this, because of the strong recommendation for making Salat al-Eid in the Sunnah, that attending this Salah is a Fard Ayn, that is an individual obligation. However, the majority of scholars have said that it is a Fard Kifaya, it's a community obligation, that as long as some people establish this prayer, then the sin is removed from the rest of the community if they don't attend. However, the strong encouragement that we have for attending the Salah in the Sunnah should make every believer pay close attention to it and be very eager to attend this prayer. In attending this very special Salah that the Muslims gather, and the unity of Islam is shown and apparent to everyone. It is indeed one of the great gatherings of the people of Islam, and they show in it and make very apparent in it their obedience to Allah Azza wa Jalla. So the Muslim should be very eager on attending Salat al-Eid. The Prophet ﷺ used to go out for and attend the Salat al-Eid and perform it in an open place, out in the open, such that this ritual would be apparent and seen by everyone. And there's no contradiction between this and the need for praying indoors sometimes, such as if Salat al-Eid were to be established in a masjid because of rain, there would be no problem with this. But the Sunnah would be, whenever possible, to pray outdoors and to do so in an open area, for this ritual to be seen by all. Salat al-Eid is like Salat al-Duha in its time, meaning that it is to be performed after the sun has risen, the height of a spear. So, if we were to, in our days and times, look at the prayer timings and we see the time for the shuruq, or the rising of the sun, it is the time that the sun has risen after that, the height of a spear, a short time. And so in the morning, well after the time for Fajr, but well before mid-morning and noon. It is a sunnah for during the Eid prayer for Eid al-Adha to delay it some, and for the Eid for the Eid al-Adha it is a sunnah to hasten to make it as soon as the time for Duha enters, and for Eid al-Fitr it is a sunnah to delay it somewhat. Salat al-Eid is also similar to Salat al-Duha in the way that it is performed, as it is 2 rak'ahs, just like Salat al-Duha. Salah is to be performed before the khutbah. There's a salah and a khutbah, and the salah should be performed before the khutbah. as the Messenger ﷺ did. The salat differs from Salat al-Duha slightly in the manner that it's performed when we look at the takbirat, as after making the first takbirat, takbirat al-ihram, there are 6 additional takbiras that are made in the first rak'ah. And in the second rak'ah, after raising from, after standing up, and after making the takbir for standing up, there are 5 additional takbiras that are made. It is best for the Imam to recite in the first rak'ah of Salat al-Eid, Surah al-A'la, and in the second rak'ah, Surah al-Ghashiyah. This was the Sunnah of the Messenger ﷺ. He is also authentically reported to have recited in the first rak'ah, Surah Qaf, and in the second rak'ah, Surah al-Qamar. So reciting these surahs is best. Before going out for Salat al-Eid, there are a number of sunan that we should adhere to. From amongst them are drawing a clear distinction, a clear line between the days of Ramadan and the days after Ramadan, the days of fasting and the days of Eid, which we are not to fast on. And we do so by following the sunnah of, before leaving the home, going out for Salat al-Eid, to eat a number of dates, an odd number of dates, before going out, so that we would be going out of the house, having eaten, and making a clear distinction that we're no longer fasting. Also, the Muslim is, on the day of Eid, to busy himself with making the takbir the entire morning before the Salat al-Eid starts. And, if possible, the person should go walking to the Eid prayer as opposed to driving. This is better. Also, on the morning of Eid, the Muslim is to bathe and to put on his best clothes and to try to look his best, wearing his best clothes, and for the men to put on some fragrance. And during this morning, the Muslim is to busy himself with making the takbirah, saying Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, wa lillahi alhamd. In addition to the other forms of dhikr, making the tahmeed, saying alhamdulillah, making the tasbih, saying subhanallah, making the tahleel, saying la ilaha illallah, and making his tongue generally moist with the remembrance of Allah Azza wa Jalla. There's no problem with greeting and congratulating one another on the day of Eid, as is reported that the Sahaba radiallahu anhum jama'een would do, as narrated by, reported by Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, that the Sahaba would greet one another on the day of Eid, saying, تَقَبَّلَ اللَّهُ مِنَّا وَمِنْكُمْ صَالِحُ الْأَعْمَالِ. May Allah accept from us and from you our righteous deeds. The Muslim is to busy himself on the day of Eid with acts of obedience to Allah Azza wa Jalla, and not simply to make the day of Eid a day of recreation and a day of play, like some Muslims mistakenly believe. They believe that the day of Eid is only a day for recreation, and that once the month of Ramadan is gone, they have to forget about performing acts of worship and just to have fun on the day of Eid. The day of Eid should not be a day of negligence and a day of forgetting about Allah Azza wa Jalla, let alone a day of transgressing the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rather, we have to thank Allah Azza wa Jalla on this day of Eid, to make the day of Eid a day of thanks for completing, for Allah Azza wa Jalla having facilitated for us completing the fast of the month of Ramadan. And we should rejoice on this day, yes, it should be a day of joy. We should rejoice over Allah being kind to us and showing us His mercy and His bounty. Give thanks to Him for having given Ramadan to us, and hope that He would accept our acts of worship towards Him during this month. And so the day of Eid is a day of thanks, a day of remembrance of Allah, and a day of joy. It should not be a day of pride and showing off, when people try to outdo one another in wearing the fanciest clothes out of arrogance. no problem with wearing nice clothes, but trying to compete with one another out of arrogance, something that is not permissible. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam would openly display his thanks towards Allah Azza wa Jal on this day by wearing his best clothing. He had a special garment that he would wear on the day of Eid. He encouraged the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in to do likewise. And he would rejoice on this day, but within the boundaries of the Sharia. He would follow and abide by the guidelines of the Sharia while showing his happiness over this day, salawatullahi wa sallam alayhi. And so one example is that he would eat, but he would keep in mind when eating those dates before leaving out for Salat al-Eid to do so with an odd number, as indeed Allah is witr and He loves with the odd numbers. There are a number of ahadith to support this. The believer is to display and openly show his thanks towards Allah Azza wa Jal on the day of Eid, and to stick to the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in doing so. At the conclusion of this month, we should follow the guidance of our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and at the beginning of the month of Shawwal, we should do likewise. There should never be a point in the life of the Muslim where he lets his guard down and forgets about Allah Azza wa Jal and becomes negligent. Rather, the believer should keep in mind that his entire life, from the beginning to the end, is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah says, قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ لَا شَرِيكَ لَهُ وَبِذَلِكَ أُمِرْتُ وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. Say, indeed, my prayer, my sacrifice, my life and my death are all for Allah, the Lord of the creation. He has no partner in that, and I am the first of the Muslims. And so, the believers are to strive to fill our time, to fill our days, our nights, and our lives with remembrance of and obedience to Allah Azza wa Jal. And there's no contradiction between rejoicing over the day of Eid, having fun on the day of Eid, and between obedience to Allah on the day of Eid. You can do both at the same time. In fact, your joy over the day of Eid and the fun that you have on the day of Eid with the correct intention can be an act of obedience to Allah Azza wa Jal. So the Shaykh Awaad said, in conclusion, I advise myself and my brothers to make our deeds righteous and to make our celebration of the day of Eid something which adheres to and falls within the boundaries of what the Messenger ﷺ has legislated for us. We should make the day of Eid a day in which we rejoice by giving salams to our brothers in Islam, shaking their hands, smiling in their faces, greeting them with kind words, rejoicing with them. He concluded saying, I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us all from amongst those who are granted success, who adhere to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ up until the point when we meet our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ask Allah Azza wa Jal to grant us all knowledge which is beneficial and actions which are righteous. Ask Allah Azza wa Jal to accept from us the good deeds that we have performed during this month of Ramadan, to accept from us our fasting, to accept from us our standing in prayers at night, to make us from amongst those who caught Laylatul Qadr on its night, and make us from amongst those who are emancipated from the hellfire during this blessed month. Ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us from amongst those who fasted this month out of Iman and Ihtisab. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make the coming Eid a day of blessing, a day of blessing for all of the Muslims in the East and the West. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد.